They kicked the blind man's guide dog out of the restaurant. Little did they know he was the owner's father. Harold Thompson felt the cool New York City afternoon breeze touch his face as Daisy, his golden retriever companion, guided him along the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. His heart beat differently that day, a mix of anxiety and hope he couldn't control. It had been 3 months since he'd seen his son, and this would be a surprise. That's when he arrived at the door of Essence, the restaurant Robert had opened 6 months ago. Harold had helped with the money from selling his house, but his son had insisted he not worry about visiting during the first chaotic months. Now, finally, he was there, ready to see Robert's dream come true. Little did he know that this meeting would change everything. "Good afternoon," said Harold, sensing someone nearby. "I have a reservation for 5 o'clock. Name of Harold Thompson." "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't allow animals in here," replied a firm and impatient voice. Harold took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time he'd been through this since Daisy came into his life. "She's my guide dog, young man. I have all the documents here." Harold began searching for the papers in the bag he carried. Michael Sullivan, manager of Essence for 4 months, looked disdainfully at the white-haired man and his dark glasses. That day was too important. 3 investors from a restaurant group were in the main dining room, and he couldn't allow anything to ruin his chances of impressing them. The promotion he so desperately wanted depended on that meeting. "It doesn't matter what documents you have," said Michael, raising his voice. "This is a high-end establishment. We can't have animals moving between the tables." Natalie Reed, who had worked there for only 2 weeks, stopped arranging the glasses when she heard the argument. She knew that man, or rather, she knew his record in the system. There was something important about that reservation, but she couldn't quite remember what. "Young man, please," insisted Harold, keeping calm. "Daisy is trained for this. She won't bother anyone. I really need to come in. It's important. You're disturbing our customers." Michael looked around, noticing some people were already watching. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Harold felt his blood boil. He had raised his son alone, worked 2 jobs for years, sold his house to help Robert achieve his dream, and now he was being humiliated at the door of his own son's restaurant. "I'm not leaving," said Harold firmly. "I have a reservation, and I have the right to be here." Michael signaled to the 2 security guards near the entrance. "Escort this gentleman out, immediately." Natalie dropped the glasses and ran to the front desk. "Michael, wait. Let me check something in the system." "Get back to work, Natalie. Now," ordered Michael without looking at her. The security guards, Charles and Andrew, approached Harold carefully. Neither of them felt comfortable with the situation. "Sir, the manager asked us to escort you out," said Charles in a low tone. "Please don't make this difficult." "You don't understand." Harold's voice began to tremble. "My son works here. Robert Thompson. He's the owner of this place." Michael let out a dry laugh. "Of course he is, sir. And I'm the President of the United States. Please, Charles, Andrew, do your job." The security guards took Harold by the arms, gently but firmly. Daisy immediately stood up, positioning herself next to her owner, but without showing aggression. She was trained to remain calm in any situation. "Let go of my arm," Harold tried to break free. "You'll regret this." Several customers began filming the scene with their cell phones. An elderly lady rose from her table, outraged. "This is outrageous. The man has a guide dog. You can't do this to him." Michael turned to her with a fake smile. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but we're just maintaining our hygiene and safety standards. The gentleman will be well taken care of at another establishment." Outside on the sidewalk, Harold found himself alone with Daisy. Tears began to stream behind his sunglasses. They weren't tears of sadness from the humiliation. They were tears of disappointment. How could Raphael's dream, the place he had helped build, have turned into this? He sat right there on the ground, leaning against the restaurant wall. Daisy lay down beside him, resting her head on his lap. Harold stroked the dog's soft fur and pulled his phone from his pocket. He needed to call Robert. But what would he say? That he was thrown out of his own son's restaurant? That the staff Robert hired treated him like a beggar? Inside the restaurant, Natalie finally managed to access the reservation system on the reception computer. When she saw the special note next to Harold Thompson's name, her heart raced. In red letters it read, "Important, owner's father. Notify Robert immediately upon arrival." "Michael!" shouted Natalie, running up to him. "You can't kick that man out. He really is the owner's father." Michael was heading back to the dining room, smiling at the investors. "I already told you to get back to work, Natalie. One more interference and you're fired." "But I saw it in the system. There's a special note," the girl insisted. "Anyone can claim to be related to the owner," Michael dismissed. "You're too naive. Now get out of my sight." Natalie felt tears welling up. She needed that job. She was paying for nursing school by herself, living in a tiny studio apartment in Queens. But she also couldn't stay silent witnessing such injustice. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Outside, a small crowd began to form around Harold. People passing by on the street stopped to ask if he was okay. A street vendor brought water. A mother with 2 children offered to call someone for help. "I just wanted to see my son," murmured Harold, more to himself than to the strangers around him. The street vendor, Joseph, was over 60 and had worked in that area for decades. "What's your son's name, my friend?" he asked, crouching down beside Harold. Robert Thompson. He's the owner of this restaurant," said Harold, pointing at Essence. "I know Robert," exclaimed Joseph. "A polite young man, always buys water from me. Let me call him." Harold held Joseph's arm. "No, please. I don't want him to find out this way. I don't want him to know his father was treated like this in his own place." "But my friend—" "Please," repeated Harold, and there was so much pain in that word that Joseph nodded silently. Inside the restaurant, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Robert's secretary, who worked in a small office in the back, had been trying to reach her boss for 15 minutes. She had received several messages from friends saying a video was circulating on social media about Essence. A video of an elderly man being thrown out. Robert Thompson was in a meeting with suppliers on the other side of the city. His phone was on silent. He had no idea of the hell unfolding at his restaurant. Michael, noticing the commotion on the street, grew irritated. That stubborn old man was still there. He approached the glass doors and from inside shouted to the security guards outside. "Why is that man still there? Disperse these people. This is damaging our image." Charles, one of the security guards, was 35 years old and had 2 children. He looked at Harold sitting on the ground, hugging his dog, and felt ashamed to be part of it. "Mr. Michael, I think we should call Robert before—" "I didn't ask for your opinion, Charles. Do your job or find another place to work." Andrew, the other security guard, was younger and had only 6 months of experience. He was visibly uncomfortable. "Michael, people are filming. This is going to become a problem," said Andrew. "Then make them stop filming," shouted Michael. The woman who had spoken up earlier was now outside, talking to Harold. "Would you like me to call someone? For the press, perhaps? What they did to you is a crime," she said, indignant. "No, ma'am, I just want to leave," lied Harold. In truth, he didn't want to leave. He wanted his son to arrive. He wanted Robert to see with his own eyes the kind of place his restaurant had become. Margaret Collins, the woman who offered help, was 68 years old and a retired lawyer. She knew the rights of people with disabilities better than most. "You have a guide dog. They can't deny access to an establishment. That's guaranteed by law," she explained. "I know, ma'am," said Harold, tired, "but sometimes the law means nothing when you're alone against the world." Those words struck a chord with Margaret. She remembered her own father, who had also faced prejudice when he was in a wheelchair in his later years. "You're not alone now," she said firmly. "I'll stay here with you until this is resolved." Others joined her. The vendor, Joseph, a young student named Leslie, a middle-aged executive named Paul. Ordinary people who simply couldn't ignore the injustice they were witnessing. Inside the restaurant, Natalie couldn't focus on her work. She watched Michael moving among the tables, smiling at important customers, and felt disgusted. How could someone be so cruel? She approached Judith, the head chef who had worked there since the opening. "Judith, do you know Robert's father?" Natalie asked quietly. Judith looked up from the pots, surprised by the question. "Mr. Harold? Of course I do. Why do you ask?" "He was here earlier. Michael kicked him out." Judith dropped the spoon she was holding. "What do you mean, kicked him out?" Natalie quickly told her everything. With each word, she saw Judith's expression change from surprise to horror, and finally to pure anger. "That imbecile!" Judith tore off her apron and stormed out of the kitchen like a hurricane. Michael was by the investors' table when he felt a firm tap on his shoulder. He turned and found Judith, with her 52 years of kitchen experience and zero patience for injustice. "Did you kick out Robert's father?" she asked, not caring that they were in the middle of the dining room. "Judith, this isn't the time. Answer, did you kick out Mr. Harold?" The investors exchanged curious looks. Michael felt sweat begin to trickle down his forehead. "I was just upholding the establishment standards. An older man tried to enter with a dog." "A guide dog," interrupted Judith. "He's visually impaired, you idiot, and he's the owner's father." The silence that fell over the restaurant was heavy. The cutlery stopped clinking. The conversations ceased. All eyes turned to Michael. One of the investors, a man of about 50 named Raymond Adams, slowly stood up. "You kicked a visually impaired person out of this restaurant?" he asked, his voice laden with something that wasn't exactly a question. Michael swallowed hard. "Mr. Adams, I can explain. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," repeated Raymond. "Interesting. Because my association specifically works with inclusion and accessibility, and we were here evaluating this establishment for a potential partnership." Michael's world crumbled in a second. The promotion, the plans, everything collapsing. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," said Richard, "because you were more concerned with impressing than doing the right thing." Outside, Robert Thompson finally checked his phone. 37 missed calls. 53 messages. His heart raced. Something was very wrong. He opened the messages. The first was from his secretary. "Robert, urgent. Your father was thrown out of the restaurant." The following ones were from friends sending video links. With trembling hands, Robert clicked on one of them. What he saw made him stop breathing. His father, his Harold, being escorted out of Essence like a criminal, and there on the sidewalk, sitting on the ground like a... Robert couldn't finish the thought. He ran out of the meeting, leaving the confused suppliers behind, jumped in the car and drove like he had never driven in his life. Every red light was an eternity, every minute torture. He thought of his father, of all the times Harold had slept on the couch so Robert could have the bedroom, of all the meals Harold had skipped so his son could eat, of all the dreams Harold had abandoned so Robert could pursue his. And now his father was sitting on the sidewalk of his restaurant, humiliated, alone. No, not alone. When Robert arrived at Essence, he saw the scene that would change his perspective forever. His father was sitting there, yes, but around him there was a circle of people, strangers who had stopped their lives to offer solidarity to a man they didn't know. Robert parked the car haphazardly and ran out. "Dad!" he shouted, making his way through the people. Harold lifted his face toward his son's voice. The tears returned, but now they were different. "Robert?" Robert knelt beside his father and hugged him so tightly, Harold almost lost his balance. Daisy put her head between them, sensing the overflowing emotion. "Forgive me, Dad, forgive me," repeated Robert, his voice choked. "It wasn't your fault, son. But it was at my restaurant, with my staff, under my responsibility." Robert pulled back a little to look at his father. "How are you? Did they hurt you?" "No, son. Only my pride. But that will heal." Robert helped his father stand up. Margaret, Joseph, and the others who had stayed there finally felt relieved. That young man who had come running, desperate, was clearly who the elderly man was waiting for. "Thank you," said Robert, looking at each of them. "Thank you for staying with my father, for not leaving him alone." "It was a pleasure, young man," said Joseph. "Your father is a man of great dignity. You're lucky to have a father like that." Robert felt the words weigh heavily in his chest. Yes, he was lucky, but in recent months he had been so consumed by the restaurant that he had forgotten to show it. "Dad, let's go inside," said Robert, taking Harold's arm. "I'm not sure I want to, son," replied Harold hesitantly. "Please, I need to make this right. You deserve to be welcomed as the important man you are." Harold sighed but nodded. Robert took Daisy by the leash and the three walked toward the entrance of Essence. The glass doors opened and the silence inside was deafening. Everyone there knew in one way or another what had happened. Some felt ashamed, others curious. Michael, standing in the center of the dining room, felt pure panic. Robert walked up to him, still holding his father's arm. "Michael, in my office now." "Robert, I can explain an office. Now." Robert led his father to the best table in the restaurant, near the window. Judith was already there, adjusting the chair, putting out fresh water, treating Harold with the care he had deserved from the start. "Mr. Harold, I'm so sorry," said Judith, her hands still shaking with anger. "If I had known what was happening—" "You don't need to apologize, Judith," said Harold with a half-smile. "From what I heard, you gave the person in charge quite a scolding." "I did, and I'd do it again," she replied fiercely. Robert turned to Natalie, who was nearby, trying to make herself invisible. "You're new here, right?" "Yes, sir. Natalie Reed. I tried to warn Michael about the system alert, but he wouldn't listen." Robert processed that. "You tried to do the right thing." "I tried, sir, but I wasn't strong enough." "Sometimes we can't be strong when we're alone," said Harold, and Natalie felt those words like a hug. "But you tried, that matters." Robert looked at his father, seeing for the first time in months, truly seeing who Harold was. A man who, even after being humiliated, still found kind words to offer a frightened girl. "Natalie, please stay with my father while I take care of something. Anything he needs, you provide." "Yes, sir," said Natalie, relieved to have a chance to do something right. Robert walked to his office. Michael was already there, standing, sweating cold. "Robert, you need to understand those investors—" "Those investors," Robert cut in, "were from an inclusion association. Did you know that?" No. How could I? And even if they weren't, even if they were just regular investors, do you really think I built this place to exclude people, to humiliate people with disabilities?" "No, but my father, Michael, that man you had security escort out like he was trash. He raised me alone from the age of 6. My mother passed away when I was 6, and he had to be both father and mother at the same time." Robert felt his voice crack, but continued. "He worked as a construction worker during the day and as a security guard at night, for years. So I could go to a decent school, so I could have cooking lessons, so I could pursue my dream." "Robert, I'm so sorry. When I said I wanted to open a restaurant, do you know what he did? He sold his house, the house where we lived together, where all my childhood memories are. He sold it and gave me the money. He said a house we can build again, but opportunities don't come back." Michael was pale. "And today, when this man came to visit for the first time the place he helped create, you threw him out, because he had a guide dog, because in your narrow-minded and prejudiced view, he didn't fit the standard of the establishment. I was trying to impress the investors. You were being a prejudiced idiot." Robert slammed his hand on the desk. "And it's not just my father. How many other people have you treated like this? How many customers have been turned away because you decided they weren't good enough for Essence?" Michael opened his mouth, but no excuse seemed adequate. "You're fired," said Robert calmly. "Robert, please. I need this job. I have bills to pay. And my father needed respect. He needed dignity. You denied him that. Give me a second chance. Please." Robert looked at him, seeing not a monster but a flawed man who had made terrible choices. "Get your things. You have 1 hour." When Michael left the office, head down, Robert allowed himself a moment of weakness. He sat in his chair and put his head in his hands. How had things come to this point? How had he not noticed the kind of person he had put in charge of his dream? A soft knock on the door brought him back. "Son?" It was Harold. "Dad, you don't need to—" "I wanted to talk to you, if you have a minute." Robert immediately stood up and helped his father inside. Harold knew the space by touch. Robert had described every detail when the office was finished, and now Harold ran his fingers over the wooden desk, the bookshelf, feeling his son's dream through his fingertips. "It's a beautiful place, son." "Not today, Dad. Today was awful." "Today was difficult," Harold corrected. "But it was also revealing. You uncovered problems that existed before I got here. Problems that would have kept existing if this hadn't happened." Robert knew his father was right, but it still hurt. "I should have been more present. I should have known the people who work for me better." "You were building something from scratch, Robert. It's impossible to control every detail. But it was my responsibility." Harold walked to where he knew there was a chair and sat down. "Son, I don't blame you for anything that happened today, but I need to tell you something I've been putting off for a long time." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that tone in his father's voice. It was the tone he used when he had something important to say. "I miss you," Harold said, simple and direct. "In the last few months since you opened the restaurant, we've barely spoken. I understand you're busy. I understand it's a lot of work. But I miss you, Robert." The words hit Robert like a punch in the gut. "Dad, I'm 71. I lost my sight 2 years ago because of diabetes. My life changed completely. And during all that time of adjustment, with Daisy, with the therapies, with the fear, I pushed you away because I didn't want to be a burden. You were never a burden, but I thought I would be. So I said it was fine, that you could focus on the restaurant, that we'd see each other after things calmed down." Harold took a deep breath before continuing. "But things never calm down, son. Life doesn't wait. And today, when I decided to surprise you, when I wanted to show you I was okay, that I could visit your restaurant alone with Daisy, I wanted you to be proud of me." Robert crossed the office and knelt in front of his father. "I've always been proud of you, Dad, always. You're the strongest man I know. But you stopped seeing me, Robert. You stopped seeing me." And it was true. Robert had become so consumed by work, so obsessed with making the restaurant work, with proving he deserved the sacrifice his father had made, that he forgot the one thing that really mattered, being present for the man who had always been present for him. "I'm sorry, Dad," said Robert, the tears finally falling. "I'm sorry for leaving you alone. I'm sorry for not realizing you needed me as much as I needed you." Harold put his hands on his son's shoulders. "We both made mistakes, Robert. I pushed you away. You let yourself be pushed away, but today, in this terrible situation, I saw something that gave me hope." "What?" "When I called you, you came. You dropped everything and came. And when you saw me on the sidewalk, I felt your love. It was there, son. It always was. We just forgot to show it." Father and son hugged there in the small office, while outside the restaurant remained in a tense silence. That moment of reconnection was necessary. It was overdue, but it was finally happening. When they came out of the office, they found the entire staff gathered in the dining room. The customers had already left, even the investors from the Inclusion Association. It was just the staff now. Judith, Natalie, Charles, Andrew, the other waiters, the kitchen staff, all looking at Robert, waiting. "I need to talk to you all," said Robert, his voice still a bit choked but firm, "about what happened today, and about what will happen from now on." He looked at every face, recognizing some people he knew well and others he had barely spoken to since hiring them. Essence was created with a purpose. It wasn't just about serving good food. It was about creating a place where people felt welcome, all people, without exception. Natalie felt a shiver of hope. "Today I failed in that purpose. I put someone in charge who didn't share that vision. And because of that, my own father was humiliated here." There were murmurs of discomfort. "Michael is no longer with us, but before thinking about replacing him, I need to do something different. I need to hear from you." Judith stepped forward. "Can I speak?" "Of course, Judith." "Michael wasn't the first problem. He was just the most obvious one. But there are other things happening here that you don't know about." Robert felt a knot in his stomach. "Tell me." "There's discrimination happening with customers, not as blatant as what Michael did today, but subtle. Older customers being seated at the worst tables, same-sex couples getting disapproving looks from some staff, less affluent people receiving less attention. Is this true? Robert looked at the others. Charles, one of the security guards, nodded. I've seen some things, yes, never knew if I should speak up. And why didn't you? Because Michael made it clear that anyone who complained about his decisions would be fired. And I have 2 small children, Robert. I need this job. That was like a stab in the gut. Robert had created an environment where people were afraid to speak the truth. This ends now, he said firmly. From today on, I want you to tell me when you see something wrong, no matter what it is, no matter who's doing it. I need to know. And if it's you doing something wrong, asked Judith provocatively, then tell me, especially if it's me. Harold, who was sitting at one of the tables listening to everything, smiled discreetly. That was the son he had raised, the son who knew how to acknowledge mistakes and wanted to do better. I'm going to close the restaurant for a week, announced Robert. We'll use that time to train the entire team. Inclusion, accessibility, humanized service, and we'll review every policy, every procedure. And who's going to train us? Asked one of the younger waiters, Lucas. Robert looked at his father. Dad, will you help with this? Harold raised his eyebrows, surprised. Me? Son, I'm not an expert in this. You've been visually impaired for 2 years. You know better than any expert what works and what doesn't, what hurts and what welcomes. Harold was silent for a moment, processing. There's one thing, said Natalie timidly. I'm in nursing school. One of my professors works with accessibility. I can ask if he knows people who do this kind of training. Perfect idea, Natalie, said Robert. See if you can get contacts for me. And there's one more thing, added Judith. If we're going to reopen after a week, we need to do it right. Braille menu, proper access ramps, tactile signage, the things a truly inclusive restaurant should have had from the start. Robert nodded, making mental notes of everything. Does anyone else have any suggestions? I do, said Margaret, the retired lawyer who had stayed with Harold on the sidewalk. She had entered the restaurant when Robert invited everyone who helped his father. Please, said Robert. Training doesn't help if there aren't clear consequences for those who discriminate. You need a written, transparent policy that everyone knows about, and that policy needs to be enforced, always. Do you have experience with this? I worked for 40 years as a lawyer focused on human rights. If you want, I can help draft these policies. Robert looked at that woman he didn't even know who was offering help. Why would you do that? Margaret looked at Harold. Because I saw my father go through similar situations in his final years, and nobody did anything to help him. If I can do something now so others don't go through the same, I will do it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. That night, after everyone had left, Robert took his father to his apartment. Harold had moved to a smaller adapted apartment after selling the house, and Robert rarely visited him there. There was always an excuse, a meeting, a problem at the restaurant, a supplier to meet. Your apartment is still beautiful, Dad, said Robert, looking around. It was a small but organized space, everything within Harold's reach. Each object had its specific place, so he could find it even without seeing. Daisy helps me keep everything in order, said Harold, stroking the dog's head. She's more than my eyes, she's my companion. Robert looked at the golden retriever, who watched her owner with absolute devotion. I was an idiot for not coming here more often. You were building your life, Robert. But you're part of my life, Dad, the most important part. Harold smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. Son, I need to tell you something you don't know. Robert felt a chill. What? When I lost my vision, it wasn't just because of diabetes. I mean, diabetes caused the problem, but I knew I was at risk. The doctors warned me. They told me I needed to better control my blood sugar, exercise more, change my diet. And you didn't. I tried, but I was working too much, you know. I wanted to save as much money as possible to help you with the restaurant, so I worked overtime, skipped meals, ate quickly between jobs. Robert felt the world spin. Dad, are you saying you lost your vision because you were working to help me? It's not that simple, Robert. But yes, part of what led to my condition was the stress and neglect of my health during that period. Why did you never tell me this? because you would have felt guilty. And it wasn't your fault, son. They were my choices. I wanted to do that for you." Robert sat on the couch, feeling the weight of that revelation. "I don't know if I can handle this, Dad. Knowing that you—" "Robert, listen to me." Harold sat beside his son. "Life is made of choices. I chose to help you because I love you, because I believe in you, because I wanted to see you happy. I don't regret those choices. But you lost your vision. And I gained other things. I gained Daisy, who gave me back my independence. I gained a new perspective on life. I gained patience that I didn't have before. And I gained the joy of seeing, even without seeing, my son fulfill his dream. Some dreams aren't worth that much sacrifice, Dad. But to me it was worth it. And do you know why? Because I love you more than I love my vision, more than I love anything in this world." Robert hugged his father and cried. He cried for everything Harold had sacrificed. He cried for the guilt he felt. He cried for the lost time. He cried for the connection they had let weaken. "I'll make it worth it, Dad," he said, when he finally managed to speak. "I'll make Essence everything it should have been from the start. I'll make you proud." "I'm already proud, son." "I always have been." That night, Robert slept on his father's apartment couch, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he didn't want to go. He wanted to be there. He wanted to wake up and make sure this wasn't a dream, that he had finally reconnected with the most important person in his life. The next morning, they had breakfast together. Robert made pancakes, the recipe Harold had taught him when he was a child. They talked about everything and nothing, about the past, about the future, about Robert's mother, whom Harold still carried in his heart even after all these years. "Your mother would be proud of you," said Harold, wiping away a tear that escaped. "She always wanted you to follow your dreams." "Do you think she would approve of what happened yesterday?" "I think she would approve of how you handled the situation, how you put the right things first, how you chose to do what was right instead of what was easy." Robert kept those words in his heart. During the following week, while Essence was closed, a lot happened. Natalie got the professor's contact, who in turn introduced an accessibility specialist named Dr. Barbara Carter. She was over 60 years old, used a wheelchair, and had decades of experience in making spaces truly inclusive. When Dr. Barbara arrived at the restaurant for the first assessment, she was not gentle. "You have a lot of work ahead of you," she said, moving around the space in her wheelchair. "The access ramp is too steep. The spacing between the tables is insufficient. The adapted restroom is a joke." Robert swallowed his pride and took notes on everything. "And that's just the basic physical stuff," continued Dr. Barbara. "There's also the matter of service, language, attitude." "We want to learn," said Robert. "We want to do it right." Dr. Barbara looked at him with evaluating eyes. "Many say that. Few actually do. Let's see which group you fall into." She spent the next 3 days training the team. It wasn't easy. There were uncomfortable moments when unconscious biases were exposed, moments of tension when people had to confront their own limitations, but there were also moments of growth, of understanding, of genuine transformation. Harold participated in some sessions, sharing his experience. He talked about what it's like to be invisible in public spaces, what it's like to be treated as incompetent just because he can't see, what it's like to depend on the kindness of strangers and encounter both kindness and cruelty. "When someone comes in here with a guide dog, or in a wheelchair, or with any visible difference, they're already tired," explained Harold. "Tired of fighting for space in a world that wasn't made for them. Tired of explaining. Tired of defending their right to exist in the same places as everyone else." Natalie was absorbing every word. She had never thought about it that way before. "So when they arrive here, the last thing they need is another battle," continued Harold. "They need a place that simply welcomes them, without questions, without judgments, without that sigh of impatience that says, 'You're causing trouble.'" "But how do we do that in practice?" asked Lucas, the young waiter. "It starts with seeing the person before the disability," answered Dr. Barbara. "I am not a wheelchair that walks around. I am Barbara, who uses a wheelchair. Mr. Harold is not the blind man with the dog. He is Harold, a man who uses a guide dog." "It seems simple when you say it like that," said Charles, the security guard. "It is simple," said Harold, But simple doesn't mean easy. You will make mistakes. Everyone does. The important thing is to be willing to learn from them. Judith, who was listening from a distance, approached. "I have a confession to make," she said. "A few months ago, a customer in a wheelchair came here. I was irritated because I had to move tables for her to pass. I didn't say anything, but I know she noticed. I saw it in her expression." The silence was heavy. "I'm sorry," continued Judith. "I didn't understand at the time, but now I understand that the problem wasn't her needing space. The problem was that I had made it a problem." Dr. Barbara Carter nodded. "Acknowledging it is the first step. The second is to do differently next time." On the third day of training, Margaret Collins arrived with a 20-page document. "Essence's inclusion and non-discrimination policy," she announced. "Review it and let me know what you think." Robert read every word carefully. The policy was clear, detailed, and left no room for ambiguity. Discrimination of any kind would result in a warning for the first offense and termination for repeat offenses. There were no exceptions. There were no excuses. "It's perfect," said Robert. "But there's one thing I want to add." "What?" "I want every employee to sign this. I want it to be part of the employment contract. I want everyone to know, from day one, that this is not optional." Margaret smiled. "Now you're getting it." As the training continued, Robert was also working on the physical changes to the space. The ramp was rebuilt with the correct slope. The tables were properly spaced. A new accessible restroom was installed. Tactile paving was placed on the floor. The menu was transcribed into Braille with the help of a local association. But the most significant change was invisible. It was the change happening inside each person who worked there. The change in how they saw the world. In how they saw people. In how they understood their role not just as restaurant employees, but as part of a larger community. On the 6th day, Robert had a one-on-one meeting with each employee. He wanted to know if everyone was truly committed to the changes. He wanted to give anyone who didn't feel comfortable the chance to leave without resentment. "No one will be judged if you decide this isn't for you," he told each one. "But I need people who truly believe in this. I can't have anyone here just putting on a show." Everyone, without exception, chose to stay. Even those who had been most resistant at the beginning of the training now recognized the importance of what they were building, except for one person. Frank, one of the longest-serving waiters, asked to speak with Robert privately. "I think I'm going to leave," he said, avoiding Robert's eyes. "Why? Don't you agree with the changes?" "It's not that. It's just, I did things I shouldn't have done. Before all this, I treated people the wrong way. And now seeing what happened to Michael, seeing how seriously you took everything, I know I don't deserve to be here." Robert was silent for a moment. "What exactly did you do?" Frank took a deep breath. "There was an older gentleman who used to come here once a week. He had Parkinson's, his hands shook a lot. Once he spilled a glass of water. I sighed loudly. I cleaned it all up angrily. I made him feel awful. He never came back." "And did you realize right away that you were wrong?" "No. I only realized it now during the training. When your father talked about how exhausting it is to have to fight all the time, that gentleman was already fighting his condition every day, and I added more weight to his struggle." Robert thought carefully before responding. "Frank, you made a mistake, a serious one, but the difference between you and Michael is that you're here, acknowledging it, feeling the weight of it. Michael never did. But that doesn't undo what I did. No, it doesn't, but it can change what you do from now on. Do you think you can be better?" Frank finally looked at Robert. "I want to try." "Then stay, but if you stay, I'll hold you accountable. I'll expect you to be an example, to tell your story, to remind others that we're all capable of hurting people, but we're also capable of change." Frank nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do better. I promise." On the 7th day, one day before the reopening, the entire team gathered for one last session. It wasn't training anymore. It was a conversation, a collective reflection about that week's journey. "I want each of you to share one thing you learned," said Robert. "It doesn't have to be big, just something that stayed with you." Natalie was the first. I learned that trying to do the right thing isn't enough if you don't have the courage to insist. Next time I see something wrong, I will insist, even if it costs me. Charles was next. I learned that my children are watching how I behave in the world, and I want them to see a father who stands up for what's right, not a father who stays silent out of fear. Judith wiped away a tear before speaking. I learned that it's never too late to change. I'm 52 years old and I'm still learning to be a better person. And that's okay, because what matters is to keep trying. One by one, each person shared. Some spoke about prejudices they didn't know they had, others about fears they needed to overcome, all about the responsibility of creating spaces where everyone feels valued. When it was Harold's turn, he stood up, with Daisy by his side. I learned something this week I didn't expect, he said, his voice emotional. I learned that from a horrible situation, something beautiful can be born. I learned that my son isn't just a good cook or a good businessman, he is a good man. And I learned that kindness still exists in the world. I saw it in each one of you. Robert hugged his father, not caring that everyone was watching. Thank you, Dad, for everything. The reopening of Essence was scheduled for a Monday at 6 in the evening. Robert had decided to do something special. The first reservation would be Harold's, the same reservation he had tried to honor a week ago. When Harold arrived, this time with Robert by his side, he was received very differently. Natalie was at the reception, smiling genuinely. Welcome, Mr. Thompson. Your table is ready, and we prepared something special for Daisy, too. Harold smiled, touched. You didn't have to. But we wanted to, said Natalie. Daisy is part of your family and everyone is welcome here. The table was in the best spot in the restaurant. There was a Braille menu waiting, and next to the table, a bowl of fresh water for Daisy, with her name engraved. Robert, you thought of everything, said Harold, running his fingers over the Braille menu. It wasn't me. It was a team effort. Every person here contributed ideas. Judith came out of the kitchen personally to greet Harold. Mr. Thompson, I prepared something special for you today. I hope you like it. The dinner was perfect, not because of the food, although it was excellent, not because of the presentation, although it was impeccable. It was perfect because of what it represented. A new beginning, a second chance, a fulfilled promise to do better. Other customers started to arrive, among them Margaret, the lawyer who had stayed with Harold on the sidewalk. Joseph, the street vendor, was with her. Robert had invited them as a way of thanking them. You turned one of the worst days into one of the most transformative, Robert said when he welcomed them. I hope you'll accept dinner on the house tonight. I accept on one condition, said Joseph, that you let me buy dinner for that young man over there. He pointed to a young man sitting alone in a corner. He looked to be about 20 years old, was wearing worn-out clothes, and was looking at the menu with the expression of someone calculating every penny. Who is he? Asked Robert. I don't know. But I saw him looking at the restaurant from outside for about 10 minutes before he gathered the courage to come in. He must be someone who saved up a lot to be able to eat here. I want to pay for his dinner. Robert felt his heart tighten. You don't have to. His dinner is also on me, but I appreciate the gesture, Joseph. It shows the kind of person you are. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the following weeks brought continuous changes. Essence began to be known not just for its food, but for its inclusion. People with disabilities started choosing the restaurant specifically because they knew they would be welcomed. This also attracted other customers who valued those principles. But not everything was perfect. There were customers who complained about the changes. Some thought the widely spaced tables took away the intimacy of the atmosphere. Others complained that the service was slower because waiters took more time talking with customers who needed assistance. One Friday evening, a middle-aged couple called Robert to their table, clearly irritated. We used to be regulars here, said the man Richard Cooper, but all these changes, honestly, it's losing the exclusivity that made this place special. Robert took a deep breath, remembering the training about staying calm and dignified even when facing difficult opinions. Could you explain what you mean by exclusivity? Well, Before you knew you'd find a certain type of clientele here. Now there's every kind of people. Robert understood exactly what that man was saying, even though he didn't have the courage to say it clearly. "You're right," said Robert calmly. "Now there's every kind of people here. People in wheelchairs, blind people, people from different social classes, people of different orientations, and you know what? I'm very happy about that." "But you're losing customers like us," argued the man's wife, Patricia. "If you're the type of customer who values exclusivity based on excluding people, then I really will lose you, and that's okay, because I'd rather have a restaurant full of diversity than a restaurant full of prejudice." The couple turned red with anger. "You'll regret this when your restaurant fails," said Richard, standing up abruptly. "Maybe," replied Robert, "but at least I'll fail with my dignity intact." After the couple left, Harold, who had heard everything from his table, called Robert over. "Son, you know you might lose money taking these stands, right?" "I know, Dad." "And are you prepared for that?" Robert thought for a moment. "Dad, you sold your house so I could open this place. You lost your sight partly because you were working too much to help me. You sacrificed so much so I could have this dream. How could I turn your sacrifice into something that excludes and diminishes people?" Harold smiled, that smile full of pride that a father has when he sees his son become better than he expected. "You've really grown up, Robert. I learned from the best teacher anyone could have." But the challenges continued. Natalie came to Robert one afternoon with a concern. "Robert, I need to talk about something that's happening." "Of course, Natalie, what is it?" "Some customers are complaining to me that the service is too politically correct. They say before we could tell jokes, be more relaxed. Now they feel like they have to walk on eggshells." Robert sighed. He knew this was a possibility. "What do you think, Natalie?" I think some people confuse respect with lack of humor. We can still be light and fun. We just can't be disrespectful. But some customers don't seem to see the difference." "You're absolutely right. There's a huge difference between healthy humor and humor that diminishes people. And if some customers can't see that, maybe this isn't the right place for them." "But what if we lose too many customers this way?" "Natalie, let me tell you a business secret I recently learned," said Robert. "Not every client is worth having. Some clients cost more than they're worth, not in money, but in energy, morale, integrity. I'd rather have fewer clients, but know that each one who comes here will be treated with dignity." Natalie nodded, but still looked worried. "Are you afraid the restaurant won't survive if we're so firm in our principles?" asked Robert, reading her expression. "A little, yes." "I am too. But you know what I'd be more afraid of? Looking in the mirror 10 years from now and seeing someone who sacrificed their values for money. Seeing someone who let their business become a place where their own father wouldn't be welcome." Those words stayed with Natalie. She was beginning to understand that working at Essence wasn't just a job. It was being part of something bigger. 2 months after the reopening, something unexpected happened. Michael appeared at the restaurant's door. Robert was leaving when he saw him there, standing on the sidewalk, looking inside as if he didn't have the courage to enter. "Michael," said Robert, surprised. "Robert, I'm not here to cause trouble," Michael said quickly. "I just wanted to talk to you, if you're willing." Robert hesitated. Part of him wanted to simply turn his back. But another part, the part that had been transformed by the last few months, knew he needed to listen. "Let's have coffee there on the corner," said Robert. They sat in a small coffee shop, an uncomfortable silence between them at first. "I wanted to apologize," began Michael. "Not just to you, but to your father, and to all the people I mistreated with my arrogance and prejudice." "Why did you do that, Michael?" "It's not just about my father. Natalie told me you had a pattern of discriminatory behavior." Michael looked at the coffee in front of him. "Because I grew up thinking I was worth more than others. My parents raised me that way, told me I was special, that I deserved to be on top. And I confused that with having the right to look down on others. And what changed? Losing my job was a shock. But the real shock came after. I tried to get work at other restaurants. But that video of your father being kicked out, it went viral, and my face was in it. Suddenly nobody wanted to hire me. I was the guy who kicked a visually impaired man out of a restaurant. Robert listened without interrupting. I was out of work for almost 2 months. My savings ran out. I had to move back in with my parents at 35, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it means to be vulnerable, what it means to depend on the kindness of others, what it means to be judged for something you did. And what did you do during those 2 months? A lot of therapy, a lot of thinking, and I started volunteering at a rehabilitation center for the visually impaired. At first, it was to try to clean up my image, but later it became something different. I met amazing people, heard their stories, saw their struggles, and I realized how small and ignorant I was. Michael wiped away a tear that escaped. One of the volunteers there is an older man named Albert. He's 73, lost his sight in an accident 5 years ago. And you know what he told me when I shared my story? He said he was grateful that I had done that. He was grateful? Yes, because if I hadn't kicked out your father, I would have kept being the same horrible person for years, hurting more and more people. But that incident forced me to confront who I really was and gave me the chance to change. Robert processed that in silence. What do you want from me, Michael? Nothing. I'm not here asking for my job back, if that's what you're thinking. I just wanted you to know that I'm changing. And I wanted to ask if you think your father would receive me, so I could apologize in person. Robert was surprised by the request. I'll talk to him, but the decision is his, not mine. I understand, and if he doesn't want to see me, I'll completely respect that. When Robert told Harold about the conversation later, his father remained silent for a long time. What are you thinking, Dad? I'm thinking it's easier to hold a grudge than to offer forgiveness. But I'm also thinking that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let anger consume you. So will you talk to him? I will, but on my own time, on my own terms. A week later, Michael came to the restaurant at an agreed time, when there were no customers. Harold was sitting at a table, Daisy by his side. Natalie had offered to be present in case Harold needed support. Michael entered with hunched shoulders, the posture of someone carrying a huge weight. "Mr. Harold," he said, his voice trembling, "thank you for receiving me." "Sit down, Michael. No need to stand there." Michael sat down, his hands visibly shaking. "I don't know where to begin." "Start by explaining why you did what you did," said Harold, his voice calm but firm. "I was trying to impress people I thought were important. I was more concerned with appearances than with humanity, and when I saw you with Daisy, I only saw a problem. I didn't see a person. I didn't see a father coming to visit his son. I didn't see a man who deserved respect. I only saw something that didn't fit the image I wanted to project. And now? What do you see?" Michael raised his eyes, meeting Harold's face, even though he knew he couldn't see him. "I see someone who has been much stronger in his life than I will ever be in mine. I see someone who raised a son alone. I see someone who didn't let the loss of vision define him. I see someone who, even after being humiliated, still had the dignity to accept meeting with me today." Harold took a deep breath. "Michael, I accept your apology. But accepting an apology doesn't mean everything is forgotten. It means I choose not to carry anger. It means I believe people can change, because I've also needed to change many times in my life." "Thank you, Mr. Harold. I don't deserve your generosity, but I'm grateful for it." "One thing, Michael," Harold added. "You said you're doing volunteer work with the visually impaired." "Yes, sir." "Keep doing that. Not to clear your conscience or your image. Do it because those people deserve your time and dedication. Do it because you have something to offer, and they have something to teach you." "I'll do that, I promise." When Michael left, Natalie approached Harold. "Mr. Harold, how were you able to do that? Forgive him after everything?" Harold petted Daisy before answering. "Natalie, I'm 71 years old. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that holding a grudge only hurts you. He already faced consequences for what he did. He's already been through his own journey of transformation. Now he needs a chance to move forward. And I need to move forward too." But it wasn't easy, was it? No. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But living with bitterness would be even harder. In the months that followed, Essence continued to evolve. Dr. Barbara became a regular consultant, visiting once a month to ensure accessibility standards were maintained. Margaret helped develop partnerships with human rights and inclusion organizations. The restaurant began receiving recognition. First came a local newspaper article about accessibility, then a feature in a national magazine about inclusive businesses, and eventually a nomination for a Corporate Social Responsibility Award. But for Robert, the greatest award wasn't any external recognition. It was seeing his father visiting the restaurant regularly. It was seeing the staff treating every customer, no matter who they were, with the same respect and dignity. It was knowing that he had turned a devastating mistake into an opportunity for genuine growth. One night, 6 months after the incident, Robert was closing the restaurant when Harold appeared. "Dad, you didn't tell me you were coming today." "I know, but I wanted to talk to you about something." They sat at the same table where Harold had sat during the reopening. Daisy lay down at Harold's feet, tired after a long day. "What do you want to talk about, Dad?" "About this place, about what you've built." "We built it, Dad. It was your money, your sacrifice." "Let me finish," Harold smiled. "When I sold my house to help you, I had a dream. I dreamed of seeing you successful, seeing you happy, seeing you reaching your potential. But I never imagined this." "Imagined what?" "That you wouldn't just build a successful restaurant, but that you would build a place that truly makes a difference in people's lives, a place that challenges prejudices, a place that gives dignity to those who are usually invisible." Robert felt his eyes well up. "You gave me something more valuable than money, son. You gave me pride. You showed me that my sacrifice was worth it, not because you were financially successful, but because you succeeded as a human being." "Dad, and there's more. That awful day when I was thrown out of here was one of the worst days of my life. But it was also the day that brought me back to you. It was the day that forced us to reconnect. It was the day that showed me that even in complete darkness, there is still light." Father and son hugged, not needing any more words. But the story didn't end there, because real change doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in thousands of small moments, day after day, choice after choice. Natalie was promoted to assistant manager. She brought to the position not only competence, but genuine empathy. She became a mentor to new employees, teaching not just procedures, but values. Charles and Andrew, the security guards, never forgot the day they were forced to choose between following orders and doing the right thing. That experience transformed them into active advocates for inclusion, not just at work but in their communities. Judith, the head chef, began developing specific dishes for people with different dietary needs, not as separate options but as an integral part of the menu. She said that food should unite people, not exclude them. Frank, the waiter who had confessed his past mistakes, became the living example that acknowledging faults and truly changing was possible. He often shared his story with new employees, not with pride, but as a reminder of constant vigilance against prejudices. And Michael. He never went back to working in restaurants. Instead, he found his true purpose. He became an educator, traveling between companies and organizations, telling his story. How prejudice turned him into a villain. How consequences forced him to confront himself. How true change was painful, but possible. He always ended his talks by saying, "Don't wait to be thrown out of your lives to wake up. Don't wait to hurt someone deeply to realize you need to change. Choose today to be better. Choose to see people, not categories. Choose kindness, even when no one is watching." 1 year after the incident, Essence was busier than ever, not because it was the fanciest or most exclusive restaurant in New York City, but because it was a place where all people felt welcome. Harold visited at least 3 times a week. Sometimes he had dinner with Robert. Other times he came alone, just to feel the energy of the place, to listen to conversations, to know that this space he had helped create was doing exactly what it should do. Welcome. On one special evening, Robert organized a celebratory dinner marking 1 year since the reopening. He invited everyone who had been part of the journey. Margaret, Joseph, Dr. Barbara, even Michael was invited. When everyone was gathered, Robert asked for attention. "I want to thank each person here today. 1 year ago, this place almost died. Not financially, but morally. We almost became everything we promised we would never be. But you saved me. You saved Essence." He looked at his father. "Especially you, Dad. You didn't just give me the resources to build this place. You gave me the example of how to live, how to face adversity with dignity, how to forgive when it would be easier to hate, how to remain kind even when the world isn't kind to you." Harold wiped the silent tears that streamed from behind his sunglasses. "And to all the people here who took part in this transformation," Robert continued, "I want you to know that you didn't just change a restaurant. You changed lives. Every customer who comes in here and is treated with dignity, every employee who learns to see people instead of labels, every moment of true inclusion that happens within these walls is because of you." Dr. Barbara raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, "but not to Essence as a restaurant. I want to toast what Essence represents, a place where mistakes turned into lessons, where pain turned into purpose, where exclusion turned into welcome. May we carry these values beyond these walls to our homes, our communities, our lives. To Essence." Everyone raised their glasses. "No," Harold interrupted, standing up. "Don't toast to Essence. Toast to the humanity that still exists in us, to the capacity we all have to grow, to change, to do better. Toast to the hope that, even in the darkest moments, light can prevail." The silence was deep and respectful. "And toast to every person who, like you, chooses to do the right thing even when it's hard, who chooses to see other people even when it would be easier to ignore them, who chooses to welcome even when exclusion would be more convenient." Daisy barked softly, as if agreeing with her owner. Everyone laughed through their tears. "To humanity," said Robert, raising his glass again. "To humanity," everyone repeated. That night was magical, not because of the fancy dishes or the expensive wine. It was magical for what it represented. A diverse group of people, of different ages, backgrounds, and experiences, united by something simple but powerful, the desire to create a kinder world. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, life went on. Essence became more than a restaurant, it became a model. Other businesses started visiting to learn. Schools used its story as an example in ethics and citizenship classes. Robert began giving occasional lectures, always accompanied by Harold. They told the story together, the son speaking about business responsibility, the father speaking about life with a disability. Together they painted a complete picture of how true transformation was possible. Natalie finished her nursing degree. She continued working at Essence while taking her course, and later decided to specialize in elderly care. She said that what she learned about human dignity at the restaurant prepared her for her true calling. 2 years after the incident, something unexpected happened. A representative from a large restaurant chain showed up at Essence. He had a proposal. They wanted to expand the Essence concept to other cities. They wanted Robert and Harold to be consultants, helping create truly inclusive restaurants. Robert was tempted. It was an opportunity for much greater impact, but he looked at his father before answering. "Dad, what do you think?" Harold thought carefully. "Son, I think you need to ask yourself one thing. Do you want to be the owner of many restaurants or the guardian of a legacy? Because the two might not be compatible." Robert understood what his father was saying. Expanding would mean more money, more recognition, but it would also mean less control, less ability to maintain the standards that made Essence special. "You're offering money," Robert said to the representative, "but we've built something that can't be bought. We've built a community, a family, a promise that this is a safe place for everyone. I don't know if that can be replicated on a large scale." "We could try," argued the representative. "We could. But trying isn't enough when we're talking about human dignity. When someone with a disability enters one of your restaurants, they don't need you to try to be inclusive. They need you to be inclusive, and that guarantee, I can't give it if I'm not personally involved." The representative nodded, understanding. "So our answer is no," said Harold, supporting his son. "But here is our counterproposal. We can help you train your teams, we can share our resources, our policies, our learnings, but you won't replicate Essence. You will create your own versions, adapted to your realities. And how will we guarantee we maintain the standards?" "You won't, we will," said Dr. Barbara Carter, who was present at that meeting. "My association will conduct regular audits. You will have to continually prove that you are honoring the commitment." The representative looked at that group of people before him. A young businessman, a visually impaired father, an accessibility expert lawyer, all united around something bigger than profit. "You have a deal," he said, extending his hand to Robert. In the following 3 years, 15 restaurants in different cities across the United States went through the training program developed by Essence. Not all were successful. Some owners discovered they weren't truly committed to inclusion, only to the image of inclusion. These failed the audits and lost the seal of approval, but others flourished. They created their own stories of transformation, their own moments of confronting biases and choosing to do better. Harold traveled to some of these restaurants when he could, always accompanied by Daisy. He liked to sit in a corner and just observe, or rather, listen. Listen to how people were treated. Listen for genuine laughter. Listen for respect in the employees' voices. How do you know if a place is truly inclusive if you can't see it? A journalist writing a story about him once asked. "I can feel it," Harold replied. "I can feel it in the temperature of the voices, in the rhythm of the conversations, in the energy of the space. Inclusion isn't something you see, it's something you feel. It's in the air or it isn't." That quote became famous. It was used in awareness campaigns. It was quoted in speeches. But for Harold, it was just the simple truth of someone who had learned to navigate the world in different ways after losing his sight. Robert and Harold became closer than they had ever been. They had dinner together at least twice a week, always at Essence. They talked about everything, about the past, about Robert's mother, about regrets and hopes. "Son, can I ask you a question?" Harold said during one of these dinners. "Of course, Dad." "Do you regret it? Not expanding? About not becoming a big chain? About choosing to stay small?" Robert thought honestly before answering. "No, Dad, because I didn't choose to stay small. I chose to remain true, and there's a huge difference in that. But you could have made much more money, and I would have lost much more soul." Robert took his father's hand. "You taught me that success isn't measured in zeros in the bank account. It's measured in how many lives you touch, in how much good you do, in who you become in the process." Harold squeezed his son's hand. "You've exceeded all my expectations, Robert, not because you built a famous restaurant, but because you built strong character." 5 years after the incident, Essence was celebrating its 6th anniversary. Robert planned a big party, inviting not just the staff and regular customers, but all the people who had been part of the journey. The decorations were simple but elegant. There were photos on the walls showing the restaurant's evolution, photos of the accessibility renovations, photos of the staff over the years, and one special enlarged photo that stood at the entrance. It was a photo from that day, the day Harold was thrown out. A photo someone had taken showing Harold sitting on the sidewalk, hugging Daisy, while strangers formed a circle around him. Under the photo, a plaque said, "Where we started, so we never forget." When Harold heard the description of the photo, he initially felt uncomfortable. "Son, why do you want to remind people of that terrible day?" "Because it wasn't terrible, Dad. It was transformative. It was the day that changed everything. It was the day that woke me up. And people need to see that true transformation often comes from difficult moments." At the party, Robert gave a speech, but this time he called several people to speak with him. First was Natalie, now the restaurant's general manager. "When I started working here, I was just a scared student who needed money. But Essence taught me that work is more than earning money. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself. Today, I don't work here because I need to. I work because I want to, because I believe in what we do." Next was Judith. "I've cooked in dozens of restaurants in my 54 years of life, but I've never cooked in a place that made me feel like I was feeding not just bodies but souls. Thank you for giving me this gift." Charles, the security guard, was next. "My children asked me the other day what I do at work. I could have said I'm security, but I told them I'm a guardian of a space where all people are important, and I saw the pride in their eyes. That's what Essence has given me, the chance to be a father my children admire." Dr. Barbara Carter, now a regular presence at the restaurant, spoke about impact. In 40 years of accessibility activism, I've seen many companies make promises. Few have kept them. But Essence not only kept them, it exceeded them. It became a model. It proved that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, but also economically viable. When it was Harold's turn, he stood up slowly, Daisy by his side as always. "I don't know how to begin," he said, his voice choked. "Because 5 years ago, if someone had told me that one of the worst experiences of my life would turn into one of the best things that ever happened, I wouldn't have believed it." He paused, gathering strength. "I was thrown out of this restaurant. I was humiliated. I was treated as if I were nothing. And I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. It hurt deeply. But that pain turned into something beautiful. It turned into change, into growth, into community. And today, when I come here, what I feel isn't the memory of that humiliation. It's the feeling of belonging. It's the sound of voices that know me, respect me, value me. It is the certainty that this is a place where I and anyone like me are welcome." Tears streamed down the faces of many present. "Robert, my son, you turned my pain into purpose. You took the worst day and turned it into thousands of good days for thousands of people. And for that I thank you, not for building a restaurant, but for building hope." Robert crossed the space and hugged his father. It was a long embrace, filled with all the words that didn't need to be said, an embrace that spoke of forgiveness, gratitude, love, and a promise that from that moment on, they would always be together. The party continued through the night. There was music, dancing, abundant food. But more than that, there was connection. People of all ages, from all backgrounds, of all abilities, united in celebration of something simple yet powerful: humanity. At the end of the night, when almost everyone had left, Robert and Harold were sitting together at a table, looking at the empty space. "Do you have any regrets, Dad, about everything that happened?" Harold thought for a long moment. "I regret the diabetes that cost me my sight. I regret not taking better care of my health. I regret some choices I made. But I don't regret helping you. I'll never regret that. But it cost so much, Dad. And it was worth more than it cost. Robert, look around, see what you've created." "I can't see, Dad. But I can feel, just like you." Harold smiled. "And what do you feel?" "I feel gratitude. I feel pride. I feel that somehow we turned something terrible into something meaningful. And I feel that you're by my side, finally, truly by my side. I always was, son, even when it seemed like I wasn't. Even when the physical distance was great. My heart was always with you." Robert squeezed his father's hand. "I know that now, Dad, and I'll never let us drift apart like that again." Melissa, the new waitress who had been recently hired, approached timidly. "Excuse me, Robert, all the tables are clean. May I leave?" "Of course, Melissa. Thank you for your excellent work today." As she turned to leave, Harold called out, "Melissa, may I ask you a question?" "Of course, Mr. Harold." "Why did you want to work here? There are so many restaurants in New York City. Why Essence?" Melissa hesitated, as if deciding whether to share something personal. "My younger sister has Down syndrome," she finally said, "and her whole life she's been treated as if she were less, as if she didn't belong in the same spaces as other people. When I learned about Essence's story, about what you stand for, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to work in a place that would see my sister for who she is, an amazing person who deserves all the respect." Harold felt the tears returning. "Your sister is always welcome here, Melissa. Always." "Thank you, Mr. Harold. That means everything to me." After she left, Robert turned to his father. "That's why we do what we do, right, Dad? For people like Melissa and her sister, for all the people who just want to be seen, respected, valued." "Exactly, son. And every time we manage to do that, every time we create a moment of dignity for someone, we justify our existence in this world." They sat there for a few more minutes in comfortable silence. Daisy was lying at Harold's feet, breathing softly, almost asleep. "You know what's funny, son?" Harold finally said. "What?" "I spent most of my life trying to see things clearly. And when I finally lost my sight, that's when I started to truly see. I saw what really matters. I saw beyond appearances. I saw people for who they are, not for how they look. You were always wise, Dad. The blindness just amplified that. I don't know if I'm wise, but I know I'm grateful. Thankful for every challenge that made me stronger. Thankful for every hardship that taught me empathy. Thankful even for that terrible day, because it was the catalyst for all of this. Robert looked around the restaurant one last time before turning off the lights. Ready to go, Dad? Ready, son. Robert helped his father stand up, took Daisy by the leash, and together they left Essence. Outside, Robert locked the door and stood still for a moment. "What are you doing?" asked Harold. "Just admiring, Dad. Admiring what we built." Harold placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "It's not just brick and mortar, Robert. What we built is intangible. It's a promise that in this small corner of the world, dignity is not negotiable." They walked together along Fifth Avenue, which was still busy even at that hour of the night. Cars passed by. People hurried to their destinations. Life in New York City continued at its frantic pace. But for Robert and Harold, everything seemed to be in slow motion. Every step was meaningful. Every breath a reminder that they were alive, together, connected in a way they hadn't been for years. "Dad," Robert said suddenly. "Yes?" "I love you." Harold stopped walking and turned toward his son. "I love you too, Robert, more than words can express." They hugged right there in the middle of the busy sidewalk, not caring about the people passing by. Some looked curiously. Others smiled upon seeing that moment of pure affection between father and son. And in that hug there was healing. Healing from years of distance. Healing from unspoken words. Healing from lost time. But there was also a promise to be present, a promise to cherish every moment, a promise to never again let life separate them. When they finally parted, they continued walking, talking about plans for the future. Robert wanted to develop an internship program for young people with disabilities. Harold wanted to write a book about his experience. Together, they wanted to continue being catalysts for change, showing that a more inclusive world was not only possible, but necessary. That night, when Robert dropped his father off at home and said goodbye to Daisy, he drove to his own apartment with a full heart. Not full of pride for the restaurant's success, although there was that too, but full of something deeper. Peace. Peace from knowing he was doing the right thing. Peace from having reconnected with his father. Peace from having turned tragedy into triumph. Peace from building a legacy that went beyond food and profits. Before sleeping, Robert opened his notebook and began to write. He didn't quite know why, but he felt the need to document everything, to tell the whole story, to ensure the lessons learned weren't lost. He wrote about the day his father was expelled, about the pain, the shame, the anger. He wrote about the transformation journey that followed, about the amazing people who helped, about the mistakes made and corrected, about growth, change, redemption. And as he wrote, he realized something. This wasn't just the story of a restaurant. It was the story of how humanity can prevail, how love between father and son can overcome any obstacle, how communities can form in the most unexpected moments, how from within our greatest shames can emerge our greatest strength. He wrote late into the night, the words flowing as if they had a life of their own, and when he finally stopped, exhausted but satisfied, he had 20 pages of memories, reflections, and hopes. The next day, Robert showed what he had written to his father. Harold asked him to read it aloud, since the text wasn't in Braille. And as Robert read, Harold listened attentively, occasionally asking him to repeat an especially meaningful part. When Robert finished, Harold remained silent for a long moment. "This needs to be shared, son. Other people need to hear this story." "You think so? Isn't it too personal?" "It is very personal, and that's exactly why it needs to be shared, because other people are going through similar situations. Other people are struggling with distance between parents and children. Other people are facing prejudice. Other people are seeking redemption, and our story can give them hope." Robert thought about it. But what if people judge us? What if they say I was a terrible son for leaving you alone? What if they criticize you for partially losing your eyesight due to neglecting your health? Then let them criticize, said Harold firmly. The truth doesn't need universal approval to be valuable. It just needs to be true. In the following months, Robert worked on the story, turning his initial notes into a complete narrative. He sent it to some publishers, not expecting much, but to his surprise there was interest. A small publisher specialized in stories of social transformation wanted to publish it. They didn't promise bestseller status or fame, but they promised the book would reach the people who needed it. The Lessons of Essence. How Humiliation Became Humanity was published a year later. Sales were modest at first, but word of mouth began to spread. Teachers started using the book in classes. Discussion groups formed. Companies began buying copies for their teams. And most importantly, people began sharing their own stories. Stories of discrimination faced, stories of changes they implemented, stories of reconnections with distant loved ones, stories of redemption and growth. Robert and Harold were invited to events, lectures, podcasts. They always accepted when they could, seeing each opportunity as a chance to amplify the message of inclusion and human dignity. At one of these lectures, at a university in Washington, D.C., something special happened. After Robert and Harold finished speaking, a woman about 40 years old stood up to ask a question. But when she started to speak, her voice failed. "Sorry," she said, wiping away tears. "It's just, I was one of the customers who filmed when your father was expelled, and I posted the video on social media." The auditorium fell completely silent. "At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing, exposing an injustice, and I was, I suppose. But I never stopped to think about the impact it would have, on you, on your lives. I just saw a good opportunity to go viral." She took a deep breath before continuing. "But later, when I saw what happened to you, how you transformed that, I realized that I needed to change too, that I was also using others' pain for personal gain, that I needed to think more before posting, before sharing, before exposing people, even for reasons that seem good." "What's your name?" asked Harold. "Felicity." "Felicity, you don't need to apologize. You did what you thought was right at the time, and who knows, maybe that viral video was necessary. Maybe it was part of what forced real changes to happen. But I caused you pain. You captured a moment of pain that was already happening. The pain didn't come from you. It came from other people's actions. And yes, the viral video made everything more public, more exposed. But it also made it impossible to ignore, made it impossible to sweep under the rug." Robert stood up to speak too. "Felicity, I was angry with you for a while. I won't lie. I saw that video being shared thousands of times and thought about how you had turned my father's worst moment into public entertainment." Felicity began to cry harder. "But then I realized something," Robert continued. "That video saved Essence, because it forced me to confront the truth. He forced me to see what my restaurant had become. And without this brutal and public confrontation, I might have remained blind to the problems. So do you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," said Harold. "But there is something to learn. For you, for all of us. That every action we take has consequences. That people on our screens are real people with real lives. That public exposure can be a double-edged sword. And that, in the end," added Robert, "what matters isn't what happened, but what we do with what happened." That interaction stayed with Robert for days. He thought a lot about virality, about social media, about how stories are told and distorted and shared in the digital world. Eventually, he wrote an article about it, not with anger or accusation, but with reflection, about how we need to be more careful with the stories we share, more thoughtful about the impact of our actions online, more human even when we're interacting through screens. The article went viral too, ironically, but this time the virality brought productive conversations, discussions about digital ethics, about social responsibility, about how we can use social networks to uplift rather than just expose. 7 years after the incident, Essence was stronger than ever. But the real victories weren't in the sales numbers or awards received. The real victories were in the small stories that happened every day. Like when a mother brought her autistic son to dinner and, instead of judgmental looks, received understanding smiles. Like when a customer in a wheelchair didn't need to ask for help because the space was already prepared. like when an elderly couple came to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary and were treated with reverence and affection. Natalie, now 29, decided she wanted to open her own business in the future. But she didn't want to simply replicate Essence. She wanted to create something new, perhaps in the healthcare field, but always based on the same principles of inclusion and dignity. "You're going to be an amazing entrepreneur," said Robert when she shared her plans. "I learned from the best," she replied. Judith, now 56, began thinking about retirement, but she wanted to ensure that her legacy in the kitchen would continue. "I want to train my replacement," she told Robert, "and I want it to be someone young, with fresh ideas, but who understands the heart of what we do here." They found Tiffany, a 32-year-old cook who had just returned from studying in Europe. She was talented, innovative, but also humble and willing to learn not just about food, but about the philosophy of Essence. Charles, the security guard, was promoted to coordinator of security and hospitality. His job now was to ensure not only that the space was safe, but that it was welcoming. He trained new security guards not in combat or intimidation techniques, but in compassionate communication and conflict resolution techniques. And Frank, the waiter who had confessed his mistakes years earlier, became a mentor to new employees. He always began the training by sharing his own story of prejudice and transformation. It was a powerful way to show that we are all capable of making mistakes, but also of growing. Harold, now 76, continued to be a regular presence at the restaurant. His health was stable, thanks to better control of his diabetes and constant medical monitoring. Daisy, his faithful companion, was aging too, but was still able to guide him with precision and love. One day, Robert noticed that Daisy was starting to get slower. She still did her job perfectly, but sometimes she tired more quickly. He talked to his father about it. "Dad, have you thought about getting a support guide dog? Is there someone who can gradually take over as Daisy is slowly retiring?" Harold stroked Daisy's head, who was lying at his feet. "I've already thought about it, but it's hard to imagine another dog. Daisy isn't just my guide. She's my best friend." "I know, Dad, but why not let Daisy train her successor? That way she'd still have a purpose, but less heavy work." It was an interesting idea. Harold spoke with the organization that had trained Daisy, and they said it was possible. A young dog, still in advanced training, could come spend time with Daisy and Harold, learning their routine. That's how Buddy came into their lives, a young and enthusiastic golden retriever who adored Daisy. In the first few months, Buddy followed everything Daisy did, observing, learning. Daisy, in turn, seemed to enjoy having a trainee. She would gently correct him when he was too enthusiastic or distracted. Watching the two dogs together was like seeing a perfect metaphor for succession. Experience guiding youth. Youth bringing new energy to experience. It was beautiful and touching. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Which part of the US are you watching us from? Do you also believe that turning pain into purpose is possible? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that bring important reflections about our humanity. Your presence here means a lot to us.